Welcome to Rise Up Voices from the Front Lines, your window into relationship, identity, safety, emotional awareness, regulation and intelligence, unleashed potential, passion and purpose.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Rise Up Voices from the Front Lines. This is a trauma-informed leadership series episode, and I'm your host, Krista Fee. Today we're really digging deep and challenging social fears and taboos. We're talking about a question that has haunted leaders for centuries. Is nonviolence truly an option in a violent world? And I invite you to look deeply into a few of the heaviest questions that any leader must answer for themselves. Let's look at the age-old question that most people are afraid to ask. Human history has always been scarred with conflict, but it's also always carried voices that dared to imagine peace. Plato wrestled with justice in the Republic. Augustine struggled to reconcile faith and force, planting seeds for what would become just war theory. Gandhi embodied ahimsa, which is the concept of non-harm, only to be struck down by violence. Churchill insisted appeasement was suicide as bombs fell across London. The question echoes through the ages: can we remain nonviolent in a violent world? For trauma-informed leaders, the weight is especially heavy because we want to heal, repair, and reconcile. But trauma whispers another hard truth. Some actors exploit vulnerability. Some forces will never yield to reason, and to protect peace may therefore require readiness for conflict. So today I'll walk with you through historical examples, philosophical frames, and practical reflection, and I'll hold space for some deeply personal questions that every leader should answer before the world answers them for you. Let's look at Gandhi and the high cost of ahimsa. Gandhi staked his life and leadership on that principle, refusing to inflict harm. He insisted that moral force could awaken conscience even in an oppressor. His Salt March and sustained civil disobedience supplied moral leverage. Images of peaceful protesters being beaten were powerful catalysts for change. But the cost was real. Thousands were arrested, brutalized, or killed. Independence came with the cataclysm of partition and mass slaughter. Gandhi's assassination in 1948 by a Hindu nationalist underscored the fragility of nonviolence in the face of maximalist hatred. His life shows both the potency and the limit of nonviolence. It can shift consciousness, but it doesn't guarantee immunity from violence, nor does it spare the leader who embodies it. Martin Luther King Jr. Soul force as strategy. Dr. King adopted and adapted Gandhi's methods to the American context. He reframed nonviolence as soul force, not passivity, but disciplined love aimed at awakening the moral imagination of a nation. Birmingham, Selma, the March on Washington, these actions were tactical, moral, and theatrical in ways that exposed injustice. Yet King constantly acknowledged the personal toll. Repeated imprisonments, death threats, the bombing of his homes, these were the daily price of moral witness. His eventual assassination makes painfully clear that nonviolence can win shifts in law and conscience, but it does not eliminate the mortal risk to those who lead. And Churchill on the moral necessity of resistance. Winston Churchill's context was very different. The existential threat posed by Nazi expansionism made appeasement immoral and unimaginable to him. His speeches didn't model nonviolence. They modeled defiance and moral clarity. "We shall never surrender," he declared, refusing to accept domination as a price for life. Churchill's stance reminds leaders that there are contexts in which nonviolence is not ethically viable if it means enabling genocide and extermination. Sometimes defense, organized, moral, and constrained by rules of engagement, is the only way to protect those who can't protect themselves. Mandela on the razor's edge between worlds, necessary resistance and a return to reconciliation. Nelson Mandela's arc captures the paradox. He began committed to nonviolent protest. By the 1960s, he joined more militant efforts, concluding that sabotage and resistance were necessary against apartheid's violent machinery. He served 27 years in prison. Yet upon release, he chose reconciliation, refusing to make the future a mirror image of the past. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was imperfect, but it embodied a courageous pivot. Resistance could be followed by forgiveness and restoration. Mandela shows that even when force becomes part of the struggle, the long-term aim can still be healing. The trauma-informed leader's dilemma. Here's the dilemma that we must hold as trauma-informed leaders. Pursuing peace at all costs risks naivety and may enable predators. Embracing violence uncritically risks perpetuating the very trauma that we seek to heal. People who have survived profound harm understand this tension viscerally. An abused child cannot simply love their abuser into change. A community under attack can't wait forever for dialogue. Boundaries are moral. Protection is necessary. So the leader's work is to live on that razor's edge. Preparing for resistance without glorifying violence. Protection without dehumanization. And holding dignity as the compass, even in the most difficult responses. So here are some heavy questions that every leader must answer. And they're not rhetorical. They're brutal in their clarity, and they are necessary. What cause am I willing to die for? What cause am I willing to take a life for? Both are stark. Both require careful, ethical, spiritual, and relational work. And if you enter leadership without clarity on these questions, somebody else or something else, chaos, a crowd, an enemy, or a crisis, may decide them for you. So let's unpack them with care. What cause am I willing to die for? Asking what cause you would die for isn't a call to martyrdom for vanity. It's an ethical litmus test that clarifies your deepest commitments. What meaning holds you steady when loss is on the line? Consider the leaders that we've discussed. Gandhi knew the stakes. King spoke openly about the possibility of death. Mandela accepted decades in prison for his convictions. None of these were casual choices. They were seen, deliberated, and owned. To answer this question for yourself, reflect on your moral foundations and values. Who benefits if you are willing to sacrifice everything? Does your commitment center on outcomes of dignity, survival, and transformation for good, or ego and ideology? This question is a guardrail. It anchors decisions in what truly matters and prevents impulsive escalation driven by pride or fear. What cause am I willing to take a life for? This second question is even more wrenching. Most of us have never truly confronted it. Military and law enforcement professionals are trained to think about it, and religious and ethical traditions have long debated it. For a trauma-informed leader, the question must be met with humility. To be clear, asking this question is not an invitation to violence. It's an invitation to moral clarity, to understand where you draw lines that justify defensive lethal force, to prevent genocide or imminent mass murder, and to commit to procedures, oversight, and accountability whenever force is considered. When considering this, probe, under what narrowly defined conditions would lethal force be morally defensible? Would that be like immediate threat to life, defense of innocence, prevention of atrocities? And what system of oversight, legal constraint, and proportionality must exist? Can you name the limits and the decision makers? Will you accept external checks rather than unilateral judgments? How will you ensure that repugnance and grief follow such an action, not celebration? Answering this question responsibly requires institutional safeguards, humility, and a willingness to carry the moral and psychological cost of that choice. Let's look at the peaceful warrior frame. Given these questions, the concept of the peaceful warrior matters more than ever. The peaceful warrior does not seek violence, trains for defense, chooses de-escalation as default, holds moral accountability when force becomes unavoidable, commits to repair and reconciliation whenever possible. This frame helps leaders prepare without becoming hungry for conflict. It insists on moral weight and institutional constraints, not raw impulsivity. So here are some practice steps for leaders wrestling with these questions. If you're a leader of a team, a community, a movement, here are some practical steps to navigate this terrain with integrity. Articulate your North Star. Clarify your values that govern your choices and return to them anytime that the pressure mounts. Create decision-making frameworks. Define who decides what in crisis, what thresholds trigger defensive action, and how proportionality is assessed. Build oversight. Invite external review boards or councils to check impulses towards escalation. Power concentrated in a single person is dangerous. Train for restraint. Invest in de-escalation training, conflict resolution, and contingency plans to avoid lethal outcomes whenever possible. Plan for repair. If force occurs, design transparent processes for accountability, apology, and remediation. Carry witnesses. Leaders always need peers, mentors, and accountability partners who can hold them to their declared standards. Isolation breeds dangerous moves. And do the inner work. Trauma, unresolved rage, or personal vendettas must be addressed through any means: therapy, spiritual counseling, or honest community feedback. Now, there are limits to theory, and there's a need for context. The hard reality is that no abstract ethical theory is going to provide all the answers. Every situation demands contextual judgment informed by values, law, and the likely consequences. That's why the process matters as much as your decision. The leader who declares, "I would never use force," without contingency planning may be morally pure, but operationally culpable. Conversely, the leader who rationalizes escalation out of fear or pride will reproduce cycles of violence. The task for trauma-informed leaders is to build processes that reduce the chance of error and to cultivate inner steadiness that avoids reactive violence. I'll close with reflection prompts that you can use privately or with your team. Again, what cause am I willing to die for? Be specific, not performative. What cause am I willing to take a life for? Define precise, narrow thresholds and commit to oversight and reparative action. Does my organization have clear protocols for crisis decisions, and who is authorized under what conditions? How am I mitigating my personal triggers so they don't shape life and death decisions? What systems of accountability and repair are in place if force has to be used? These are all heavy questions. They're not meant to be answered casually. But if you choose to lead others, you must answer them, or someone else will answer them for you in a time of crisis. So here are a few final thoughts. The burden and the paradox. The final burden of leadership is to live in paradox, to hope for peace while preparing for conflict, to resist without losing our humanity, to protect without descending into cruelty. If you're a leader, do the work now. Clarify your North Star, codify your decision-making process, build oversight, and do the inner work. Hold the heavy questions as moral guardrails, not slogans. Make sure that your team and your community understand the boundaries you will not cross and the values that will steer you when storms come. This is the work of the peaceful warrior, not a naive pacifist, nor a glib warmonger, but someone who prepares, constrains, and always seeks dignity. This is Krista Fee reminding you, rise up out of the ashes of your experiences and live and lead your life on fire. Join me in the Trauma-Informed Leadership course and community to dig deep into what it really means to lead from a trauma-informed place and connect with others, creating a new generation of leaders ready to rise up and create a world of passion, purpose, and happiness.
Become a Rise Up Hero sponsor to provide mental wellness and crisis response resources for those who serve country and community. Join us in the Rise Up movement today.